Hi, I'm Thaddeus McNamara. Until recently, I was the packaging and distribution manager for an upstart startup that was attempting to do serious disruption to an industry involving energy powder that was traditionally held by a number of South American organisations as a strong monopoly. Due to the implied non-disclosure around the obliteration of said startups, I really don't want to get into it too much. However, let's say that this particular enterprise that I was involved in, and my position within it, has given me a particular insight into today's topic of conversation. That being bricks. And not only from the perspective of packing and shipping them. I bricked quite a bit during that purge. To be very clear up front, we're talking about bricks. Bricks, not blocks. They're too big. Not stones. They're like bricks and blocks, but they're just rocks. And not cement, which I think needs a video all of its own. We're talking about just bricks. I think a reasonable backing for this decision is the 1965 Dr. Seuss publication, Fox in Socks, where he clearly discerns the difference between quick-trick brick stacks and quick-trick block stacks. And while he doesn't necessarily speak to the other entirely, the inclusion of stacks of chicks and stacks of clocks can easily be extrapolated to discern the difference between bricks and rocks. Also, fuck you, cement. With that out of the way, let's talk about bricks. Some of the earliest known examples of bricks being used in the human archaeological history come from two places which share an interesting thread, one of them being Tel Aswad, and the other one known as Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük? What is curious is that both of these civilizations were roughly 7,500 years BC, the first to use mud bricks in order to build buildings and domiciles. What was also interesting is that they both had curious ways of handling their dead. In the case of the Aswads, they were quite happy to repaint and replaster the heads of their dead over and over and over again, much like some people would do with an old 1978 Sigma back in the early 80s, just bogging and sanding and repainting all those dodgy panels time and time again. And in fact, sometimes you have heads and bodies in entirely different places, like some weird game of mismatch, not unlike the panels of Sigma back in the 1980s. The folks down the road in Çatalhöyük would do something a little bit more John Wayne Gacy, in that they took the bodies of their ancestors and stacked them Tetris style under the floorboards of their domiciles, and at times, according to history, suspected to use the bones to create a plaster which they would use to paint the inside walls. Despite this macabre connection, what we do know is that they were the first couple of civilizations that we know were using mud bricks to build buildings. Let's take a moment to discuss the different classifications of bricks that are commonly out there and the different manufacturing methodologies. You have mud bricks. Mud bricks are not kiln dried, they are sun dried, and they exist to this day. They generally are a clay and turd brick that uses a substrate such as straw or some other binding agent in order to hold them together, because they don't have the hardness of the next type, kiln-dried bricks. Kiln-dried bricks use a clay base which is formed and then run through extraordinarily hot temperatures, much like pottery or any other really hardened clay product, in order to become a very strong material. There is also a third type which exists outside of cement, because we know how I feel about cement today. There is a third type which is essentially known as a chemically cured brick. Now, these may or may not use autoclaves, and they may or may not use lime, and they may or may not use a lot of different things, but ultimately they're brick ceviche. And who the fuck is going to want to have ceviche of brick when you can have yourself a good baked brick? I don't know anyone out there who's gone, you know what, instead of fucking crumbing and frying or battering and frying my bit of hake, I just want you to just douse it in a fucking bunch of vinegar and feed it to me with some undercooked chips and a fucking dim sum that you cooked by just fucking shaking it in the air. I want my stuff properly cooked. Fuck you. Despite concerted and extensive research, I'm yet to work out what the brick equivalent of chicken salt is. Since most of the audience here is probably international and has no idea what chicken salt is to begin with, probably a bit of a lost cause, but let's just say it's tasty, it's delightful, it's MSG, it's heart disease, and you don't know what you're fucking missing out on. Back at the production of bricks, it's also worth noting that the way that they're shaped is one of the other big discernible differentials when considering what a brick is and how it's made. The original molds for bricks were essentially hand molds that wood in a shape, and they had almost all the time a ratio of 1 to 2 to 4. It was a hand mold that you'd put your brick in, you'd knock it out, you'd let it dry in the sun for a little while, and then you'd kiln it. Over time, we got pretty good at this, and not only were we doing mass cut molding, which was great for kilned bricks because they used a firmer clay to begin with, but we went on to the point where we'd extrude a brick out. Not unlike the poo that was being used in early mud bricks, we'd have designed machines to poo out a bit of brick, cut it off, let it dry, and then we'd kiln it. There are actually a lot of overlaps between poo and brick through this whole video, and I apologize for that. I kind of feel like they're intrinsically connected. Not only because of some of the obvious parts of it, extrusion or the substrates used in mud bricks in the early time, also because I think the most descriptive explanation of being constipated was provided by a man with an opium addiction, where he explained that trying to take a poo was like trying to push a pine cone through the hole in a house brick. Which leads us nicely to why house bricks have holes. They reduce the weight of them, and they increase either the ability to kiln it more effectively, they help with the ability for mortar to join them together, as well as having qualities that make them better insulators. In some regards, the air pockets in a very many-holed brick, like this one, help to ensure that a good double brick house stays warm or cool, depending on the opposite of what's going on outside. For the most part of the 9,500, 10,000 years that we've been making bricks, they followed a relatively simple 1 to 2 to 4 ratio for their sizes. The rationale behind this is that it was roughly the length of a hand in terms of being able to easily pick up and mortar the brick, as well as a combination of the material weight, as well as the structure of a brick wall, which used interlacing brick patterns with sideways bricks at the end to create connectivity to adjacent 90-degree walls. However, we decided around about 150 years ago and moving forwards that that was just far too fucking simple. I guess we needed imperial bricks, because now if you work backwards from the length, it's roughly 6/3, 5/3, and then the actual brick height. So in the modern day, instead of having a nice simple ratio, we have a strange ratio, and we also have a varying length between roughly 220 millimeters and 250 millimeters for the longest edge on a brick. The interesting part is that the USA has the shortest long edge of a brick by most of the recognized international standards out there now. This may or may not just be because Big Brick is trying to rip us off, or might have something to do with hand sizes. Not that that's correlated to anything else. Just saying. And although we used bricks roughly from around about the, I think it was 4th century, roughly up until about the 19th century, with mixed results in order to replace stone to build structures, it wasn't until the 19th century that we industrialized brickwork. Now, it's no secret to anyone who knows me that I'm a massive Kate Winslet fan. And I bring this up because of the fact that there is a connection to the brick in a 1994 New Zealand film, Wicked Garden, starring Kate Winslet. In this film, the brick in question was augmented with an external sheath of polyester and became, in a callback to one of my prior videos, a mechanical battery of sorts, which was then discharged in order to end the parents in that particular film. It was definitely something that cinema hadn't done before. Prior to that, my experience in combining house bricks and stockings were limited to putting a tennis ball into the foot of a stocking and tying it to a house brick and having to hit it over and over again as it came straight back towards me. And people ask why I don't play tennis today. Seriously, you haven't seen Wicked Garden, go check it out. It's a great film. So good. So good. While we're on the note of pop culture references, Ben Folds 5, a trio, did a song called Brick. Now, I'm not going to delve into the topic matter of the song as it's a little too dark for my likings at this time of night. However, given Ben ended up living for an extended period of time in Adelaide, I can only imagine that he may have wanted to become a mechanical battery in his own right. One of the most curious properties of bricks in the modern day is that from time to time they'll materialise in loose stacks near sites of civil unrest or protests. This has led to some people theorising, including myself, that they may actually be an interdimensional being that, while looking like a brick, is in fact some sort of creature that wants to support and promote social order. I can imagine that in the unfathomable realms of the universe, that there is something which is sentient and intelligent and active in social order, which looks like a brick. Additionally, this is supported by pedestrian crossings, which have like a little library where you can borrow a brick to safely escort you across the road, which drivers are known not to adhere to the crossing signals on. Or even just carrying one of these amazing interdimensional sentient brick-looking creatures can dramatically change the behavior of drivers driving past you while there's water in the road, and instead of splashing you with that shit-covered, oil-filled trash, they'll slow right down and be very cautious as they go by. Thank you, Interdimensional Brickman. Come to think of it, bricks are pretty great. I am a big fan of the old hand rock, as we all know, my ancestor having invented it. But there's not a lot of scenarios where having a hand brick isn't at least as good as my hand rock. I did briefly touch on the manufacturing processes for bricks, but one of the ones that I didn't get into too much detail of was specialty bricks, which have been around for a very long time. Kiln bricks, for instance, are bricks that have a very high heat tolerance so that you can build a kiln to make bricks out of these bricks. And unlike other bricks, they won't brick themselves. But also pressing materials such as asbestos or other relatively specialized into a brick-like shape should absolutely be considered a relatively good brick. I look at the brick and think about the future of a brick. Now, if we've gone for the entire recorded human history without needing to significantly upgrade the brick, and other than just completely bollocksing its dimensions to make no sense, it's pretty much as perfect as it ever was. What can we do to make the brick better? Well, for starters, let's give it an IPv6 address because we have plenty of those. Stuff some electronics in there. Get it to, work out how shaky something is or how hot something is, or I don't know. Basically like your smart ring, but it's a brick. Why not? Let's get some Wi-Fi bricks going on. That's always pretty cool. And they exist. It's actually a thriving industry. People building smart homes with smart bricks. But there are actually pretty cool smart bricks. One idea of brick technology is that instead of using all of that carbon monoxide, dioxide, trioxide, tetrachloride, one future brick technology, which is kind of here and kind of not, is the idea that you can make a brick by, instead of using all of the pollutants to generate it via the kiln and the heat and the absolute horrible amount of emissions that creates, is to instead create it in a manner which sinks the carbon back into it. Pretty cool. I think that is a good step forward. I do think we're limited by how much we can do there. Larger surfaces, larger buildings, larger structures are going to be better for carbon sinks. The one that I like more, again, circles back to the combination of brick and turd, because we have these lumpy, long, monolithic turd stacks that have existed since primordial Earth, and they were created by some form of bacteria which has been basically shitting pancakes over the course of forever. They've been shitting pancakes forever. What if we could program these pancake shitting prehistoric microorganisms in order to make them square like wombats rather than round like me after a night on the rum? That would allow us to grow bricks. Now, couple that with the idea that you can have microorganisms that are consuming carbon dioxide and other pollutants, potentially even breaking down microplastics and other polymers in the environment and producing an output of those to be a carbon brick-like thing that we can then go to build with, removing a problem and producing a useful, flexible, it's a brick. As long as we can take shit out and shit out shit that we can use, I think that's a big step forward. And we're this close. We are this close to being able to program things to that effect. It's just a matter of years away. Whether or not it's cost effective is always going to be an interesting question. At one point in time, we didn't like using Greenfield's paper because of the fact that it was more expensive than other paper. No, we didn't. No, that never happened. Recycled paper that is bleached and usable has actually generally been not as favoured as plantation Greenfield's paper. Ooh. Self-repairing bricks would be a pretty amazing step, because one of the big issues with a kiln-fired brick is that it is brittle. Based on the structure of the holes and the edges of it, etc., you end up with a situation where they do go through quite a bit of wear and tear. So if, again, looking at the idea of some sort of futuristic bioengineered thing that was able to sequester the carbon and potentially other elements out of pollution and keep your bricks pretty square, then we'd reduce the overall cost of maintenance as well as, rebuilds, brick structuring, building, etc. What really goes into a brick anyway? Generally it's about 40% sand, about 20 to 30% clay, 7% lime, and shit, literally and figuratively. A bit of iron oxide up to 7% gives us all of the nice red bricks that we see. It is basically just shit yet again. As we progress through the process of making longer lasting batteries, we could use bricks in the home sense of building a house out of bricks as a way of concealing the batteries. In Australia, we have a lot of rooftop solar. We have lots of sun. Honestly, I'm regretting the haircut that the robots gave me. So much sun, it hurts. But if we've got all this rooftop solar and we have power bricks that allowed us to store all of that excess energy, the feedback to the grid and the oversupply, which is happening from time to time, becomes less of an important point. The biggest challenge with those batteries that we could do it with right now is lifespan. As we come across some potentially lower efficiency batteries that have much longer lifespans and aren't full of lead, because I know what Sydney is like, and that is 100% due to lead poisoning. As long as we have less lead and long lasting batteries, why not build the family home out of a huge parallel array of batteries, or at least a feature wall or something? You know, gotta be better than fucking pebbles or the 80s glass bloody square things. And we can then store the energy and discharge it. Makes sense. More than those square fucking glass things anyway. There's a few companies out there who are working very hard to make waste-based bricks, and they're pretending it's an innovation. A personal observation from many years ago. Although one of my favourite uses for a brick is to have it available to me on a day-to-day basis at arm's length on my desk in a workplace as a multi-purpose percussive maintenance tool, I know that some managers out there are not a big fan of it. They'll ask you to get rid of your brick, and when you try to explain that it's just there for dealing with those problems that nothing else can adequately fix, they just don't listen. They just don't listen. So I'm going to wrap this one up, not by looking forwards too much more, but instead looking at the now and looking backwards. There is a very simple technology which has almost not changed in our entirety of understanding the history of humans. It is simple, it is effective. They've made a little plastic version with notches on it for geeks and children to play with. And that made me researching this video far more complicated than I would have liked to admit. However, all I can say at the end of the day is love your brick. Take your brick out. Take it for a walk. Let people know you love your brick. And your brick will love you back. I'm Thaddeus McNamara. This is my brick. And I'm whacking on.